Hi guys! Today let's discuss something which I've been asked quite a lot. Should we pull in the clutch during braking? Like with most things in motorcycling, the answer is it depends. This question is very common because of how beginner riders are taught to brake in beginner rider courses. Inside courses, we are usually braking at pretty slow speeds, around 10, 15, maybe 20 miles per hour. At those speeds, the bike stops quickly, and if we don't pull in the clutch as we are stopping, the bike stalls. So, we have to pull in the clutch, there is just no way around it. Naturally, when we practice this for a while, we build muscle memory to pull in the clutch almost as soon as we apply the brakes. This habit is reinforced by another thing beginner riders are taught quite often – to pull in the clutch during any emergency. As a brand new rider, we might accidentally do something silly with the throttle, which is why, in those cases, pulling in the clutch acts as a failsafe. It cuts the engine power and prevents the bike from going out of control. This safety net is great for beginners, but as we get better and better at managing the throttle, we won't need to pull in the clutch every time something feels sketchy. At this point, this crutch becomes obsolete. Because of all this, it is common for riders fresh out of the beginner courses to always pull in the clutch when braking. But that's not always the best approach, and here is why. Let's talk about straight line braking first. If we are gently slowing down, like when approaching a red light, the exact procedure is not really too important. We can use the front brake, the rear brake, we can use both brakes and either pull in the clutch immediately or wait until the end. In the end, we'll slow down and stop. However, soon in this video we'll see that there is a particular way to use the clutch during braking that makes more sense for a couple of reasons. Since during gentle braking it doesn't really matter what we do with the clutch, let's look at a bit more aggressive braking, where any mistakes will manifest themselves quicker. At first, let's assume that we are using just the front brake. In this case, we generally don't want to pull in the clutch during braking, because we'll lose the engine braking on the rear wheel. On tall bikes or bikes with a short wheelbase, engine braking can be enough to replace the rear brake completely, since the bike's weight shifts forward during braking. By the way, we have discussed the effects of weight transfer in our videos about aggressive fast braking. I recommend watching them if you haven't already. Now let's assume that we are on a longer bike and we won't use both the front and rear brakes. In this case, we also don't want to disengage the clutch right away, especially during hard braking. If we do it, it becomes much easier to lock up the rear wheel. On bikes with ABS it is not a huge deal, since ABS will prevent the rear wheel from locking up. But this becomes more critical if we are braking in a corner. We'll come back to that in a minute, let's wrap up straight line braking first. Though we generally want to avoid using the clutch during braking, there are two exceptions. The first, as we already discussed, is braking at lower speeds. When we are quickly braking to stop from around 10 or 15 miles per hour, we'll need to pull in the clutch almost immediately, or we will stall the engine. But when braking from higher speeds, it is better to wait until the very end of the braking, about half a second to a second before the bike stops completely. However, not every braking maneuver ends up in a complete stop. Often we are just slowing down, like when matching the speed of traffic around us or scrubbing off some speed before a corner. In those cases, we might not need to touch the clutch at all during braking. The second case, where we'll need the clutch, is when we are downshifting. If we are coming to a complete stop, we can downshift several gears at once in the final moment, when we have to pull in the clutch anyway. But if we are just slowing down, we have two options. We can finish braking first and then downshift one or multiple gears at once. Or we can downshift one gear at a time while simultaneously braking. To make this smooth and avoid upsetting the bike, we can use rev matching, where we quickly blip the throttle while pulling in the clutch and downshifting. It takes practice, but once we get it down, Braking and downshifting will be quick and smooth, and we'll hardly spend any time on the clutch. We'll cover rev matching in great detail in the next video, so remember to subscribe. Now, what about braking in a corner? Or using trail braking? In this case, we absolutely want to avoid pulling in the clutch. Cornering amplifies all the potential problems. If we disengage the clutch, locking up the rear wheel becomes incredibly easy, because the rear tire is already using a good portion of its grip for cornering. And when we brake mid-corner, the weight still shifts forward, leaving even less grip on the rear tire. Here is a good illustration of this weight transfer mid-corner. A rider comes into a corner too fast, panics, and grabs the front brake. The bike slows down so fast, the rear wheel lifts off the ground. Then the front tire washes out and down goes the bike. The key takeaway here is that when braking hard mid-corner, the rear wheel has almost no weight on it, meaning it can lock up super easily. With all this in mind, imagine this. We are braking mid-corner, this unloads the rear wheel, which means now we have very little grip on the rear tire. Most of this little remaining grip is already being used for cornering, because our bike is leaning, and for braking, because, well, we are using the brake. If we disengage the clutch, the tiniest mistake, the slightest excessive force on the brake pedal will lock up the rear wheel. This is a recipe for a high side. And even if we don't lock up the rear wheel or the ABS saves us, remember, we are still cornering, and unless we are stopping completely mid-corner, at some point we will have to go back on the throttle. If at that moment our clutch is pulled in, we will need to release it incredibly slowly and accurately in order to not slip the rear tire. It's a pretty narrow window, because in case we don't give enough throttle and release the clutch, we will receive a sudden engine braking mid-corner. If we give it a bit too much gas, we will have a sudden burst of power mid-corner, the moment we release the clutch. Either way, once again, leads us to a high side wheel. So, in case we need to brake mid-corner, we certainly don't want to pull in the clutch. To confirm this, without actually trashing our bike, we can try this on a straight line. Slow down with the clutch pulled in, then release it. You'll probably feel the bike jolt from the sudden engine braking. Now imagine that happening while leaning over in a corner. It will not be fun. However, just like with braking on a straight line, we have two exceptions. When we need to stop completely and when we need to downshift. With stopping, it's just like on the straight line. We can pull in the clutch just before we stop completely. At this point, our bike is already pretty much vertical anyway, because it lost most of the speed. Just like on a straight line, we can now pull in the clutch, downshift if necessary, and stop completely. With the downshifting case, normally we want to downshift on a straight line before we even commit to a corner. That's because each downshift, if not done perfectly, can upset our suspension and therefore destabilize the bike. On a straight line it doesn't matter too much, which is why we want to downshift before we lean the bike. Even if we are trail braking, meaning we start our braking on a straight line and carrying some brakes into a corner, we still want to downshift while braking on a straight line. Downshifting mid-corner while leaning the bike can be done if we shift really smoothly or our bike doesn't lean too much and has plenty of grip to spare. However, usually it is considered a bad practice, which introduces more things to worry about into our cornering. It is usually best to avoid it altogether and do all the downshifting before the corner. So now, we can summarize the whole thing about the clutch during braking. In most cases, we usually don't use the clutch during braking unless we specifically need it for something, like downshifting or when we stop completely. We don't just pull it in without any reason. Before we wrap it up, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Ultramax Cell, the maker of high-tech base layers that I personally think are some of the best for motorcycle riders. What makes Ultramax Cell thermal layers stand out? It is all about material. A special polypropylene fiber with a unique 3D honeycomb structure. This design gives us a snug fit and helps wick moisture away quickly. In hot weather, it boosts evaporative cooling, and in the cold, it traps more air to keep us warmer. It's quite a nice upgrade over regular thermal wear, so definitely check it out. I'll drop an Amazon link in the description along with their direct contact info. Depending on your location, you might get a better deal by reaching out to them directly due to varying shipping options. And on this positive note, it is time to wrap it up. Thank you for watching, ride safely and have a wonderful day! Bye!